So today we're going to go through four of my favorite lessons from one of the most special books I've ever read, and it's Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. So for those of you that have never heard of this book, it was basically the private journal of a Roman emperor, Marcus Aurelius. And the crazy thing is, this book was never meant to be published. It was basically a collation of his personal insights, his thoughts, his philosophy on life, and just a lot of his outlook. So lesson number one is that we should all be living more in the present. And before reading this book, and even to this day actually, this is something I struggle with a lot. So a lot of the time I'll just sit there and I'll mull over past decisions, things I've regretted from the past, things I shouldn't have done, things I shouldn't have said, what if things had been differently. And likewise with the future, instead of mulling over the past, I'll worry a lot about the future. And what ends up happening is I miss a lot of the moments that are happening around me in the very present moment by thinking in the past and going and time traveling into the future. But then this quote really brought it home for me. Remember that the longest lived and those who will die soonest lose the same thing. The present is all that they can give up, since that is all you have, and what you do not have, you cannot lose. And this was actually a really big moment for me because basically I had connected this to another idea I had read, and which is that the definition of desire is having a contract with yourself not to be happy until you have that thing you want. The thing is with me is in the past I would always have these grand goals, and the problem is in the past I'd always be hyper fixated on it. So for example, it could be achieving a certain thing, or it could be earning a certain amount of money, or getting to a certain place in life. And the problem is it would almost be this subconscious thing where if I hadn't achieved it, I almost didn't allow myself to be happy. Or, for example, I would constantly basically just refuse to go out with friends or family, and I would neglect a lot of people around me who loved me, and I would miss a lot of moments. And the problem is, even after all of this, and I do end up achieving some of those goals, I'd always look back and say, oh damn, I really wished I'd been more appreciative. I'd really wished I had actually enjoyed that time I spent slogging instead of just forcing it to be a grind when it really didn't need to be. Like, it didn't really affect the outcome in the end if I had just done the same things I did, but actually taken a moment and enjoy the present more instead of just mulling over the future all the time or regretting the past. If I had just stayed more present, because at the end of the day, every present moment, the present moment is all you have. And when the present goes, you're never going to get that back. So even if you do end up achieving your goals, there's going to be some part of you that wishes you could have had that time back. Every moment is unique, and yeah, you'll never get it back. So you have to basically enjoy every moment you get. And because at the end of the day, one of the very limited resources we have in our brain is our attention. And if we waste that attention on the past or in the future, just worrying about things, we're going to miss so many beautiful moments that are going to be gone forever. And the tragic thing is a lot of them could be happening right in front of your very eyes, but I just wouldn't see it. So lesson number two is this lesson that we're actually evolved from a genetic standpoint to be very adaptable. So which means that whatever life throws at us, we have it within us to deal with anything that comes. And this I find is probably one of the most powerful quotes in the book. Our inward power, when it obeys nature, reacts to events by accommodating itself to what it faces, to what is possible. It needs no specific material. It pursues its own aims as circumstances allow. It turns obstacles into fuel. As a fire overwhelms what would have quenched a lamp, what's thrown on top of the conflagration is absorbed, consumed by it, and makes it burn still higher. So this ties in with psychologist Carl Jung's idea that we all need difficulties in order to be healthy. And the quote is that man needs difficulties and pain. They are necessary for health. So basically accepting the fact that having problems is a key condition for life, and not wishing you wouldn't have any problems or all of your problems would go away, because at the end of the day, if every single one of your problems went away and if you had no problems, the only way for that to be true is if you weren't alive. And knowing that's the way we're built and we're evolved, we have everything within us we need to deal with those problems as and when they come. And that is really the core of our nature as humans. So basically not wishing for a life where we have no problems, but actually wishing for having the strength to deal with the problems as and when they come. And I find this way of thinking just so empowering. So this mindset would really remind me of this autobiography I read from this gold medalist Olympic champion at rowing. And basically what he would say is problems would always come up on race day or in training. It could be absolutely anything, but there would always be problems. So for example, it could rain or something could happen where it would mess up their start schedule, or someone could get an injury in training. A lot of things can happen that messes up the plan. But what his mindset was that whatever happened, he would always say to himself and his crew, this is just what we needed. as in this is just what we needed. This is here. What something bad will happen, he would take that as motivation. This will make us try harder. Basically, the gist of the mindset is whatever thing came their way, they would basically turn that, reframe it, and think of it like an advantage for them. Because a lot of the time, in this example and in life, things happen, and whether it's good or bad, it's just us putting a label on it. Lesson number 3 is realizing that this lesson of the only constant in the entire universe is change. Everything is born from change. Change is constantly happening, and nothing ever stays still. Now, I personally have to say this is probably the most difficult lesson for me to internalize, because it's the most counterintuitive to my nature. By nature, I find that change is very uncomfortable, whether it's changing my environment or changing my relationships. So when I came across this point and really internalized it, it basically had the biggest change in my entire life, which is a little bit ironic because the whole point is about how change is not constant in the universe. Personality wise, ever since growing up, I've always had to do things a certain way. Like if I've settled on a way of doing something, I really don't like changing it. And even though a lot of the time it wasn't really logical, like I wouldn't have tried all of the methods, it wouldn't probably even be the best way. I would just find a way of doing it, and I'd feel like, okay, this is working. So if it's working, why would I change it? So it could be even like trivial things like making matcha, or an exercise routine, or a way of working. If I find comfort in doing it, I'll just continue doing it that exact same way. And even with bigger things in my life, I've had the tendency of staying in the same place when it may have been far overdue for me to make a change. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one that's this way. I think a lot of it comes from the evolutionary perspective that familiar environments are safer because we know the setup, there's less likely to be random predators and stuff like this. But obviously, this mindset doesn't really translate well into the modern society. Frightened of change, but what can exist without it? What's closer to nature's heart? Can you take a hot bath and leave the firewood as it was? Eat food without transforming it? Can any vital process take place without something being changed? Can't you see it's just the same with you and just as vital to nature? So naturally, I just don't like change. But this quote really helped me come to terms with it and understanding that is actually just a natural part of nature. And I've come to actually even look forward to it in a way. And I feel like this book has really changed me in a very profound way. And even if you think about it in a deeper way, it's true. Even with relationships with the closest people around you, your loved ones, they're always in a state of constant flux. So for example, if you're married, the relationship with you and your partner in the first year is going to be very different to the dynamic of that relationship in the 5th year. So it's always in a constant state of change. So it could be constantly deteriorating where you have people separating, unfortunately, or it could just be this thing where it could be growing and growing, and then it could be flourishing and improving year on year. But the point is, nothing stays the same between husband and wife, between siblings, between parents and your closest friends. They are always changing, and it could be improving or it could be deteriorating, but nothing stays the same. So the really cool thing about meditations is all of the ideas in this book actually links up, and I'm in the process of inputting every idea I'm reading into my virtual slipbox. So for example, we start off by saying we need to live in the present, which, for example, go into my slipbox and we have a point here, living in the present. Because Marcus Aurelius is saying living the present moment is actually all we have. And personally, I find this really freeing because it makes me less anxious about the future and I mull less over about past decisions. And it follows on from this that if we live according to our nature and we live in the present, that whatever the universe throws at us, we'll have what it takes to deal with it. Because we are evolved to be extremely adaptable, which we have here as this point, humans are extremely adaptable. And then the really cool thing, and because it follows on from this, that we are extremely adaptable, while we can never predict what's going to happen in the universe, we have what it takes to deal with whatever change comes our way. And so we go from living in the present to humans are extremely adaptable to this point that Marcus Aurelius is saying, the only constant in the universe is change. And now if you connect all of the dots, it forms this coherent lattice, like this mental model of how you can approach the world, which I just think is really fascinating. Because going back to the point of how humans are adaptable, you know, if we look around us, look how different some people are living. You get people that are living right in the depths of nature, in tribes, for example, but then on the other end of the spectrum, people are still thriving in concrete jungles and everything in between. Humans are extremely adaptable to whatever environment, whatever changes that come our way. We are built to survive. So I just think it's really beautiful. Each point in isolation is pretty cool, but when you join them all up and it forms this coherent lattice work, It's just so stunning. So lesson number 4 is about paying attention to what you think about on a day-to-day basis. In my opinion, this is probably one of the most beautiful quotes in the entire book, and the first part of it goes like this. The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts. One thing I'm realizing as I get older is that your actions and who you are all stem from what thoughts you allow yourself to entertain in your own mind, and it all starts from there. All of your actions and your beliefs and your entire external world. And the really crazy thing is you do actually have a choice in terms of what thoughts you want to accept, but most people actually just don't exercise this free will at all. We get pulled in different directions by social media, by the mainstream media, people with an agenda. They put thoughts. We're being pulled in 100 different directions by sensationalist headlines, and we get pulled into these thought patterns that are not in your best self-interest. So I give you one example of how this personally changed me. So a lot of the time in the past, when bad things would happen to me, I would fall into this spiral of just self-pity, saying, why did this happen to me? Like, I deserve better than this. Like, I'm so sad. Why did this happen? It doesn't really make sense. Into this basically big spiral of feeling sorry for myself. Generally speaking, envy, resentment, revenge, and self-pity are disastrous modes of thought. Self-pity can get pretty close to paranoia. Paranoia is one of the very hardest things to reverse. You do not want to drift into self-pity. And it really clicked when I read this and I linked it back to the Marcus Aurelius quotes about how your thoughts colour your mind. So I could just fall into this cycle of self-pity like I had done in the past. You know, sit there wallowing and saying, why did this happen to me? Or I can say, I'm not a victim. I'm not going to sit here and follow this thought patterns of self-pity. I'm actually going to take this energy and take action with it. And then it really all made sense to me, because for the first time, I feel like I was being self-aware of my thoughts. Like, why am I having these thought patterns? Like, does it benefit me in any way to think like this? No, it does not. And it goes back to another book I read about taking smart notes and learning and stuff like this. One of the very limited resources in our brain is our attention. So why would you pay attention to negative modes of thoughts when that attention is so precious? Why wouldn't you give yourself thoughts that are more conducive to your long-term best interests, instead of these disastrous modes of thought, like Charlie Munger put it? So actually, as a direct consequence of this Marcus Aurelius quote about how important our thoughts are, I actually updated my Obsidian setup to include a new note of what thoughts I want at the top of my mind every single day as a new template. So every time I create a new daily note, all of the thoughts that I want to direct my attention on, I get reminded every single day. So this is actually a work in progress, but this is the template of my daily notes and the things that I actually want on the top of my mind on a day-to-day basis. So I've split it into 3 sections. We've got life philosophy, happiness and well-being, and truth-seeking. So for example, under life philosophy, we want to make sure that we value our time over every other resource. And happiness and well-being, going back to that whole point we talked about, we do not allow our thoughts to fall into self-pity. We refuse to be a victim. And truth-seeking, embrace a growth mindset. We actively want to seek feedback, positive or negative. And of course, going back to the whole philosophy of this whole thing, because we know that our attention is limited, we want to be extremely selective what we pay attention to. So when we got to our daily notes, this is what it would look like. It would have all of the prompts for the stuff we want to write, so thoughts, how we feel, whatever. But when we go down, every time I have a new daily note, this note comes up with all of the things that I want to keep at the top of my mind. And all of this came directly as a consequence of me reading Marcus Aurelius' quote of what we think about on a day-to-day, moment-by-moment basis actually colours our soul. And it's so beautiful. And this is how I've internalized it and changed my process, so I don't fall into those bad habits again. So when a book has stood the test of time for almost 2,000 years, you do know it's something very special. And there's no other book in my entire collection that I've come back to more times than this book. And the really crazy thing is, every time I do come back to it, I gain something new. When I have a different perspective in life, when I've learned new things, I come back to it, I always get a new nugget, a new little insight that I hadn't seen before. So for example, only very recently, thinking about it and really connecting the dots, am I starting to realize how important it is to really pay attention to what you think about on a day-to-day basis. So if you are interested in more content about learning, epistemology, philosophy, make sure you sign up to my free newsletter, where I talk about a lot more of these points and my favorite quotes and my favorite books that I'm reading. So let me know in the comments, if you've read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, what some of your favorite points from the book are.